Hello and welcome to Prime Lenses. I'm Ian. Each episode, I speak to a photographer about 3 lenses that have really meant something to them on their photographic journey. Perhaps they use them every day in their kit bag, in their professional work, or maybe these are the things that they reserve for themselves in their spare time for their personal photos. Perhaps attached to a camera they used as a child, or perhaps ones that got away, never to be used again, maybe attached to a defunct film format or an iPod Touch even. My guest today is Julien Pasternak. I came across Julien actually via someone else's work I like. Julien has a podcast, but it's in French, and as I don't speak much beyond basic French, I don't listen to many French podcasts, although ironically maybe that would help. Anyway, Julien recorded an episode in English with Dan Milner, who is a photographer whose work I've enjoyed for a number of years and will actually be a future guest on the show. But Julien was so interesting to hear speak with Dan that I thought, well, he'd be a great person to try and get on. I wonder if I can. As a Parisian-based photographer, he shoots a lot of weddings, shoots a lot of street, is wildly enthusiastic, and has been very encouraging. And I really enjoyed hearing his perspective on 3 lenses. So please join me in welcoming Julien. Because for years, I was the person who would tell folks that the camera you have doesn't really matter. That like actually every image you'd ever seen that you'd admired was taken using equipment technically less good than what you'd probably just bought. So like it doesn't matter. And to an extent that's definitely true. But the origin of these conversations and this sort of series of talks was because I started to see it. And I could see it with the different lens. And once you can start to see the different characteristics of something, it's just like, oh no, like it's over now. It's about to get very expensive.
I'd say it differently than you do. I'm not the kind of people who will buy Leica like this because I work. I use cameras in one evening. My camera gets more shots than a normal person would do on the whole life of his camera.
Yeah.
So regular people buy a camera, and after 2-3 years, it's 5,000 shots. One evening, it's 5,000.
Yeah.
So I can't afford a Leica for this because if I buy a Leica, it's an M10 and the lenses and everything, and it's dead in 1 year. I usually, my cameras, I change them every 3 years. Before it was 2, but it's starting to get more and more expensive. So I don't want to spend that much money. So I try to make them last longer, but I can't justify buying a Leica, rationalize, not justify. Rationalize buying a Leica, but I understand that it's the kind of thing that can make you want go out more. So you have to have the nice stuff. I don't think you were recording when we were saying that. But I bought the podcast equipment and then I started using it because I wanted to use it more.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe I don't know. Probably I would have continued making the podcast, but maybe I would have stopped just because I didn't have the investment and the nice things to use, and I wanted to use it. I pressed record. I'm excited, you know.
Yes. Yeah. No, it does. The tactility, I think, is a big deal of it, a big part of it as well. Like finding a thing that speaks to you. You know, that like you just enjoy, and you know, my one of my previous cameras is like probably one of my favorite cameras of all time. Like if I could only have one, is the Ricoh GR, the GR3 specifically, which just for I like small portable things. Like I like to be able to move quickly and sort of be fleet of foot and things like that. And just the versatility of that thing is just unreasonable for its size, for the performance you get from something of that size. Like that Fuji, the X106 that's now out makes me very excited for another GR. Right, like that would, because that size of sensor, or that kind of performance of sensor, but in that really tiny package, like Ricoh have to be working on something.
It's working. It's working enough. I have the X105, so the version V. I'm not really wanting to buy the 6, though it's the same. I work on XT5, so it's the same sensors. I feel it's slower, but I'm not using it the same anyway. And there's one thing I love with my X100V. It's dented everywhere. I always have it outside. It's never inside the bag. It's on the bag or in my hand. I don't have a neck strap. I have Peak Design released something, you put your
Yeah.
fingers
Yeah.
on the side,
Hmm.
and then you just have it hanging
Yeah.
on your hand, and you take pictures. So either it's in my hand or on my backpack's strap.
Mm.
So it's always getting in the doors everywhere, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of dents in the camera, and I
Yeah.
love it, and I don't want to
Yes.
change just because of that, and I will change the day it doesn't work anymore,
Hmm.
but I'm hoping it lasts very, very long.
Yes. There are many like it, but this one is mine. Like
It's
it's
yes,
quite yeah.
it's what you just said. I 15 years ago I bought a sports car, and
Mm.
it was very exciting for me because it was a lot of money. It was
Yeah.
my dream car, and about two 2 days after buying it, I had an accident, and
Oh,
I was very, very pissed.
yeah.
And the girl I was dating at the time came to me, and she wanted to make me feel better, and she said, "At least now it's yours."
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. My first big motorbike when I was learning to ride bikes, and I got my first 600cc bike. The night I got it, it was a new bike, and I dropped it and scratched the
Yeah,
engine, and it was like, well, there we go, it's done
yeah,
now.
no more.
Like you say, it kind of helps a little bit. I must admit, my most of my equipment I tend to buy secondhand. I tend to
Yeah.
buy used stuff, and then you're inheriting a little bit of the kind of imperfections and things anyway. I think that's probably good. And then you can just get that out of your system and then get out and use it. Like the first time you dent something or the first time you scratch it.
I like being the one who makes the scratches because it's
Yeah.
memories. You
Yes.
remember the time you dropped the camera, the time you fell in the water with the camera,
Mm.
which happened to me.
Yeah.
You remember. So the camera obviously is not working anymore, but
Yeah.
I still have it somewhere in my house, and I won't let it go because obviously I can't sell it, but it's a memory, and I love
Mm.
it.
Yeah. No, super important, I think, to save those things up. Where does your journey then with photography start? Like, what was the first camera you held and used and
Oh,
that kind of got you obsessed?
so the first camera I had, it's in front of me. It's an old
Mm.
Kodak. I recently, my mother found every old camera we owned for my entire lifetime.
Wow.
So I have very weird cameras I remember using when I was a kid, and the Kodak was my first lesson of photography. It was when I was a teenager. I still have a newspaper article that's somewhere on my website
Mm. Mm.
of me as a teenager taking a photography lesson and learning
Oh,
to
wow.
develop the film. So at the time, I was not ready probably
Mm.
for that, and it was expensive, and my parents were not willing. I was changing hobbies every week, as a
Mm.
good teenager has to do. So
Yeah.
one week it was piano, the other week it was photography, the next week it was guitar, then it
Yeah.
was basketball, then it was
Hmm.
soccer, then it
Hmm.
was something else. So at some point, photography could have stuck at the time, but I think my parents saw that it was a big investment and
Yeah.
not willing to buy a big camera for me changing my focus a few days later.
Sure.
So it had to go. It had to go away, which was for the best because 20 something years later, I was working in real estate development, and I had to leave my job.
Mm.
And chance, the luck, not chance, luck made it that I left with a big check that
Right.
allowed me to see things coming and decide what I wanted to do. And I thought that I could take 2 months for me,
Mm.
for my for what so doing something that I wanted to do,
Yeah.
but never got to do.
Yeah.
And in the end, it was photography. So I had two uncles that were into photography. I went to one and I said, okay, I want to get into photography. What can I do? What do I buy? And he said, okay, you go. So it was the Canon EOS 650.
Hmm.
So Rebel,
Yeah.
Fluid.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always changing, but it's
Hmm.
really the entry level camera. I bought that. I took photography lessons because I didn't remember anything from when I was young,
Hmm.
and I started doing photography as an amateur, like everybody started. And at the same time, I was leaving real estate, so I got back into real estate as a flat hunter.
Mm.
I rented an office from a friend of mine who had an agency that makes events agency.
Hmm. Yeah.
One he knew I loved photography, and one day his photographer was not there. He said, "Come,
Uh-huh.
make
Yeah.
pictures for me." So I was paid like 5 beers that night, and I loved it. And
Yeah.
I started doing more and more frequently pictures for him, and then I got paid, and then I got paid more, and then it started. And in 6 months, I made more money in photography than real estate, and that's how it started. Not the passion, but the work,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's two distinct things with me. And
Mm.
my story is 2011. I start working in photography, and 2019 COVID, really fall in love with photography,
Right.
which
Was
is
it? Yeah.
crazy. It's not usually not the this way, but it was technical. It was a fun job,
Hmm.
and I wanted to be a photographer without knowing what it meant.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's lovely that you've always had that separation as well of the part of this that you love and then the part of this, because I've noticed it with these conversations where those that work in photography have their work equipment and their work gear, but then they have the one that's kind of for them. And
Yeah,
that's what's so nice about this conversation is that there's 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 the things you're talking about there, but there's that deeply ingrained origin story of those first cameras and the connections with
yeah.
family and the connections with people. And yeah, what was it about the time that you had, that we all had in 2020 and sort of like through the pandemic, that was it just that you could focus more on this one thing without other things, or you needed a focus, or?
It's never just a clean cut.
Mm.
It started a few years earlier. So I told you I took photography lessons. It was
Mm.
it's not really a company. It's association. I don't know the English word.
Mm.
People doing like kind of a public service, but
Ah, right.
still you're paying something,
Mhm.
and they pay the teachers. So after a few years, I went to a photo fair in Paris, and they had a stand there, and I went to them and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And said, "What are you doing now?" I said, "I'm a working photographer."
Mm.
And they said, "Okay, so you should come teach for us." So I did. So it was like 2017, 2018. And I started working with them, and I met other photographers, which had never happened before.
Mm.
And the thing you have to understand, I was coming from real estate, which is a very competitive and mean environment.
Right.
So to me, competition is someone to kill, not
Yeah. Right.
someone to at the time, not now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was competition in the bad way, which means
Mm.
if you are in front of me and you do the same job as me, I will crush you.
Yeah.
That's the way of thinking I had at the time. And so I started meeting other photographers. And one of the photographers, which is my first guest on the photography podcast,
Mm.
we were having fun on the fair. We made technical demonstrations of what we could teach people. So
Mm.
my most sold uh, job I do for companies, I make Hollywood portraits, but volume Hollywood portraits. So you
Mm.
have
Right.
200 people, and 4 hours, I will make a Hollywood portrait printed for that person, for every person in the room in those
Wow.
4 hours.
Yeah.
This is the one I sell the most still to this day. And so they knew the group I was teaching with. They knew I did that, and they say, okay, let's create that with strobes on the fair.
Mm.
So I did exactly that. I had people, and I said, okay, let's see how we do that. So strobes, we were missing
The trigger,
the
or?
trigger, yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they forgot. Because I didn't
Right.
take my stuff. They said we bring everything. You just bring
Ah.
your camera. They forgot the trigger, and they forgot what you fix the strobe on the stand with.
Yeah.
They forgot everything. So
Oh
it was
no.
really with rubber tape.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was. I had paper for focusing the light. It was
Right.
really
Wow.
hell, you know.
Yeah.
And the idea was, we'll teach you to make a Hollywood portrait with nothing, and we really had nothing.
Yeah.
So I had to be very creative, and I managed to do that. And there's one guy who comes to me, and he was another teacher, and he was the friend who I made the podcast with. And he said, "Okay, I'm doing Polaroid
Mm.
lesson. Let's see if we can combine our two workshops." So we made Hollywood portrait with Polaroid.
That's
So we
so
have
cool.
them together, and he takes my picture, I take his picture, we make a few pictures, and then he posts my picture on his Instagram. And his girlfriend calls him and said, "Where do you know Julian from?" And she
Huh.
was actually a very good friend of mine, which I've worked in photography a few years back. And so we started to talk, and I realized I didn't have to kill him. I could like him. He could be a good friend, and he became a great friend after that. And this is what started the shift,
Right.
from photography being purely a job, purely technical, and purely business, and making money, and never thinking about something personal, to
Mm.
meeting people that open your mind.
Yeah.
And
No, that's fantastic.
you start realizing that. So it's before COVID, and then I start making friends, and then COVID hits. And with the group of friends I made, we were doing street photography,
Mm.
which was just a way to learn new tricks for me from other people. And when COVID hits, every job stops. I
Yeah.
want my camera staying in the bag for like 2 months straight.
Mm.
And I was starting the podcast, so I was already willing to learn more things, but it was only starting. And after a few months without the camera, I felt the itch, that I was missing it.
Mm.
So I started in France. We had like 1 hour, 1 kilometer.
Yeah.
So I started doing that. I call that 1H, 1K, 1 hour, 1 kilometer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was digital. So I decided I had 36 exposures and not one
Right.
more.
Nice.
And that's how I started really loving photography.
Mm.
It took only 10 years.
Yes, as it turns out. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I took something recently. I've been trying to be good at taking pictures, and it's not my job. It's one of the things I say a lot on the podcast. I'm unburdened by this being my profession, so I can just enjoy it, which is why these conversations are kind of like nice and loosey goosey. Um, but I was talking to someone recently, and they liked a photo I took of them, and I just messaged them out. I was like, "Well, I have been trying to do this for 17 years. So
Yeah,
if at this point they weren't good, like that would be tragic.
yeah.
I would have to keep trying, you know."
You ha-
But
you, you're always learning. That's the
yes,
thing.
mm. Oh yeah, I look at images I made even 2 years ago, which I was really proud of, and I now
Mm,
look at them now and I see things that I would do differently and changes I would make and
Nice,
things like that. Always, I think
nice.
that's good. I'm very glad as well because when you started talking there about the killer instinct that you'd had at a previous point in your career, I was like, oh no, like I'm a rival podcaster. I'm about to get eaten.
I learned that, but that's something, it depends on where you're raised. I was raised in real estate,
Right.
and real
Yeah.
estate is a. I could tell you horror story about the guy
Mm,
sitting in front of me with a knife in my back.
mm,
I,
yeah.
I could. This is we could talk about payback also later in the podcast, because I learned a lot about that. But it's how I was raised, that everybody is competition. And
Yes.
when you start like that, anywhere you go, you have to apply what you know. So
Mm,
thankfully, I was good at selling.
yeah.
So it was not all negative, but this part was not great, and it took me a long time to get rid of it.
Yeah, yeah, no, it can eat you up, I think, if it's not channeled in the right way. But it's funny you mentioned competition because your first lens, as a segue into the kind of the
Yeah.
conceit as to why we have these conversations, is the Olympus, the Mu, which I had a Canon MC, which was my first point and shoot 35mm, which I think was a competitor camera to those Olympuses at the same sort of time. Talk me through how
Probably.
that
I,
came on.
I still have it. I can show it to you. It's
Yeah. Oh,
right
brilliant.
here. It's this one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And, it's this lens.
yeah.
Is it? It's no more battery,
Yeah.
but it's It's this one. So it's one of the first cameras I used. I really used. It's the camera from my teenage years.
Yeah.
So when I started making pictures of my travels, of my friends, of my life,
Mm.
of everything, it's this camera. I have my cousin's bar mitzvah in Jerusalem when I was
Wow.
18. It's probably this camera that made all the
Yeah.
pictures. I still have the album somewhere around
Hmm.
in my bookshelf.
Yeah.
But it's the camera that made all this, and it's the first time I made memories, really,
Mm.
which I didn't used to do before. This is really the first time, the first lens, the first camera that I used for that, and it's probably the reason I love 35 millimeter,
Yes.
and I love imperfect photos because the photos with these cameras are really not perfect. They are
No.
more often than not in focus. So you have to pay a lot of attention to that because you don't really have a way to know. So this is this plus two other pictures what define my taste,
Yes.
what I make, and
Yeah.
it's not perfect, which can be a problem sometimes with some clients. But I love this look,
Mm.
this
Mm.
imperfect look.
Yeah. No, I'm the same. I have. So hang on. Mine's on my shelf. It's but it's the same thing for me where this 35 millimeter f2.8
Yes, I love it.
is what I think of as a photograph as well. And so
Yeah,
now on my M is sitting in a bag over there. It has a Zeiss 35 f2.8
yeah,
because that's my favorite focal length, and as you say, it's imperfect. It's sharp in the middle, but around the edges gets this incredible kind of vintage feeling bokeh, and it's sort of a little bit irregular and it's a little bit unusual, and you get this lovely thing of. And then the previous camera I had was a Sony A7, the original A7.
uh,
My favorite lens that never left the front of it was a 35 Zeiss 2.8. So I think it's sometimes that first contact that you have with the medium kind of is indelibly marked on your brain and you
it
can't
is,
ever
but
leave.
you can still forget it because for a long time I was not shooting 35.
Mm,
Is
okay.
another story. Still the same trade show on photography.
Mm,
I see a conference with a French wedding photographer whose name is Sébastien Roignan. Maybe you've heard of him,
mm,
who is also big on YouTube. And in this conference, he says something like, great photographers in wedding are close to their clients,
mm,
and you can choose to be close with a 35 and an 85, or very close with the 24 and the 50. So
mm.
I choose to be very close. So I thought that guy
Right.
knows what he's doing, so
Yeah.
I will do the same. And I shot for years weddings with these lenses,
Mhm.
and I was never happy with what I got.
Right.
And I couldn't say why, and I hadn't realized that this was what defined me.
Mm,
And I made a workshop with fearless photographers. It was Hui and Tyler Verken. I don't know
right.
if you've heard of him,
Rings a
who's
bell.
great in photojournalism. And he looks
Mm,
at my pictures and he said, "Why are you shooting 24?" So it was Fuji 16 and 35, but
yes.
it was equivalent to 24 and 50. And he says, "Why are you shooting these lenses? Clearly, it's not your the way you see the world." And
Ah,
I said, "What I told you." It said, I saw a wedding photographer saying this, and he said, "Yes, it's good for him.
yes.
Maybe not for you." So I
Mm,
tried his way, and it got a little better. But last year, I found my perfect combination,
mm,
which is not 35 and 80, it's 35 and 50.
mm. Okay.
And it's the same. I did 35 and 80 for a very long time, and I was making 10% of the pictures with the 80, and I
Mm,
was never happy with what I shot. And last year, I made a workshop with a French photographer called Eric Bouvet, that you may know, who's
mhm.
in storybooks, is one of the best I ever met. And I had the chance to discuss with him a few times. And what I love about the guy is he will never pull any punch with you. If
Right.
you're reviewed and the guy is nice to you, you're never gonna learn anything. So he
Yeah.
doesn't pull any punches, and I got punched a lot, and it was
Right.
in public. There were 20 people who were like,
Oh wow.
oh my
Yeah.
god, what is he telling him? He's going to cry. And I was like, no, it's okay. And he looked at them and said, no, I know he can take it, so it's okay. And so we talked about lenses, and he's always been using 35 and 50
Mm.
because he sees the world in 35 as I do,
Hmm.
but sometimes you have to have a little extra reach
Yes.
and to get a cleaner picture. And 50 is enough.
Yes.
And if you need an 80, you have it in your bag. And for the one time you need the 80, you go get the 80, you put it on your camera, you take the
Yep.
picture, you put the 50 back.
Yes.
And since then, I've been working 35 and 50. And I think maybe I will say otherwise in 3 or 4 years, but I think I found my range.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least for now as well, which I think is
Yeah.
like, because that taste can change over time. It's so funny though, because my bag for the last year has been a 35 and a 50
Mm.
pretty much all the time, unless I go to events for work or something and we're very close, and then I'll put a
Yeah.
28 on because you don't know if you've got room to move around, but like, yeah, that's so interesting. And I have a 90 for those situations, a bit like you're talking about having an 80 or an 85 or whatever. It's like for those situations when you need it, it goes on and then it comes off
Exactly.
again. And
You have to have a range because you don't
yeah.
know what you're going to find.
Yes.
If I'm on a dance floor, of course, I'm not at 35. I have
Mhm.
equivalent to 16,
Yes.
which I put on the camera, and then I take pictures because I get very very close to people.
Yes.
But the rest of the time, if I do anything, it's 35 and 50.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. On the subject of feedback, because I think I discovered you via Dan Milner, who I think
Yeah,
is another person who I appreciate their candor.
yeah,
I've exchanged emails with him very briefly a couple of times, but like what I love about the video production he makes and like the blogs he writes about photo composition and his kind of approach to photography, I think it's refreshing that
yeah.
it's quite straightforward. Some would say a little bit brutal at times, but I think that's probably what we need.
You if you can get good feedback that is not harsh.
Mm.
This
Yeah.
is something I'm really I'm sure it cannot work any other way. You cannot have somebody be nice to you and you learn something. You have to
Mm.
learn getting hit.
Yeah.
If you want to be good at street photography, you can't learn while watching videos
Mm.
of shitty photos because there's not many videos where the people can film themselves, make good pictures, teach you something. It doesn't
Mm.
exist. I've watched
Yeah.
a lot. I always stop in the middle now. I stopped following most of the guys that are famous for this right
Yeah.
now because I'm a positive person. I try to be a positive person. I haven't always been, but I'm working
Mm.
on this. And the thing is, that's the thing. I'm sure I cannot learn if
Mm.
people are nice to me while seeing my pictures. I want to know what doesn't work. That's what Eric did for me, Eric Bouvet. I had 20 pictures to show. The ones that were good, that he considered good, yes, okay, that's
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Yeah.
And then he arrived on two pictures. I know they don't work, but I keep them in my portfolio because I like them, because I like the moment.
Right.
And then he started and he said, okay, what is this? What
Yeah.
is this? Why is this? Why is this here? Why? And then you understand, and you understand your picture. You thought it was okay. It's not
Hmm.
okay. You,
Yeah.
you, you see? And then he arrives on another picture that I can send you if you want to show it.
Mm.
It's a picture I made while doing street photography with another friend. And actually, when I work with event agencies, and they often hire comedians. And one of the ones I see most is a fake paparazzi. So
Right.
you have an event, and there are fake paparazzis which use
Hmm.
vintage camera. I want to kill them every time because they use vintage cameras and flashes,
Yeah.
and they destroy them just playing
Yeah.
with the
Oh.
cameras. And so I arrive and I take the picture of the fake paparazzis in front of the Grand Rex in Paris, which is a very famous theater.
Mhm.
And the picture was good, and I like it. Not much to change, but it's not made a big impact. I
Mm.
love the picture, but it was never impactful on people who watched it. And he arrived and he said, "You have to crop the picture."
Mm.
Why do I have to? He said, "There's a square." So one of the guys was wearing a white badge
Mm.
on his shirt. He said, "This, you have to get rid of it, and you have to crop tighter. And then when you crop tighter, there's a girl in the background that you didn't see before, and now you see her, and she's looking at you, and you make eye contact." And then I reposted the picture, and it worked much, much better.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very tiny crop.
Yeah.
So,
But it just
have-
refocuses it just that
yeah.
much. Yeah.
But you have that feedback. My wife, she said, "Oh, it's great. I love the
Mm.
picture."
Mm.
Cool. My friends, they say either I don't like, or it's okay, but they don't want to be the ones that hit, that hit
Yes.
you
Yeah.
with the bad news.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to have someone like that. So Eric did that. Daniel is doing that, but the thing is, he's interesting also.
Yes.
You can be mean and uninteresting, and nobody will uh, will follow you, or you can be harsh but interesting, and because you are interested in what he has to say, you listen to the rest.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's I've also enjoyed watching his transfer into becoming like a birder as well in
Yeah.
the last few years. Like his change, the things as interests change, like you were saying about evolving and sort of your work progressing as well. That's
Yeah.
really cool. How have you found kind of being a podcaster and talking with people, having these kinds of conversations with creative people, not just that one with Dan? I mean, I don't speak enough French to be able to follow the other episodes, but like, how do you find kind of those perspectives? How do they land with you? Have they moved your practice on a little bit as well?
A lot. So I view it. I have an article in French on my website about that I may get to translate someday because
Mm.
I often refer to it. It's called the Lego photographer.
Mm.
So Lego, I think it's universal. The name,
Yeah.
it's little bricks. And when I started to make the podcast, I was wondering how I could express what I get from one episode each time. And one thing I learned, I made a lot of workshops about wedding photography and event photography in general. And if you take notes and you let some time pass and you come back to your notes, you realize 95% of what you've heard, you have forgotten.
Mm.
And you remember 5% at most. So often you remember one little thing that changed in your photography. So they say something like, "We're gonna learn to make a shadow or a silhouette," and you learn that the silhouette cannot be good unless it's very separated,
Mm.
unless you understand the movement, unless you understand the shape, and then you remember this and you forget everything that was around that.
Mhm.
And so at the moment I was thinking about that, my kids were playing with Lego, and they had each. I have 3 kids now, but I had 2 at the time,
Right.
and they each had a plate, a base
Yeah.
plate,
Hmm.
and they
Hmm.
had a lot of colorful Legos, and
Hmm.
they were taking the same Lego but not placing them at the same spot. And I thought this is exactly what the way I learn. So you have an empty plate at the beginning, and then you take the technical aspect. So you have aperture, you have ISO, you have every technical bit that you can find, and you put them in place. And some people, they start with aperture and they only make aperture for a while, and that's the way they learn. And shutter speed and ISO, it's another in another place. And some people start with shutter speed, and every once in a while you found one person that starts with story and not technical. And so the thing is, you put the technical pieces in really under everything else, and then you start building, and nobody places the Legos the same. you know. And once a Lego is in place, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's very, very hard to change it after a few years when it's buried very, very fast. So if you've always shot for aperture, and someday you learn something new and you want to unlearn that, you have to dig very, very deep and deconstruct everything to rebuild around it. So you have to go dig for
Yeah.
that specific piece. So this is how I see the podcast. It's
Mm.
every time I learn one small thing. Sometimes the one thing is bigger,
Hmm.
sometimes the one thing is very small but makes a big impact. And so every person, I'm looking to deconstruct them into tiny pieces of Lego that the listener, which is originally me, because it's very selfish doing a podcast like that.
Yes.
You have to be, if you're not interested in what you want to sell, you
Mm.
know, asking the questions, you're not going to be interesting. So you have to be
Yeah.
interested. So what I try to do is understand how me I will learn something, and then some people will learn something else, because I throw a lot of I'm looking for the word. I throw lines, a lot.
Mm. Yeah.
Then I
Yeah.
see what bites, and
Yes.
some things come, some things I'm not interested in, and I get messages saying this changed my life, and I say,
Wow.
okay,
Yeah.
uh, okay, cool, but I didn't hear it. So I go back and I hear it, but maybe it doesn't make an impact on me because I
Mm.
don't feel it that way. Last episode I recorded, which was released today, we're talking, it's a friend photographer. She's a girl, very sensitive, she's not sensitive is not the right word. I see you smiling. I think it's
Mm.
sensitive is tactile. It's
Ah, right.
not tactile. It's s- when you get emotional very, very easily.
Ah, okay. Yeah. So we would say in touch with your emotions, or like
Yes.
your emotions close to the surface.
So yes, so
Yeah.
you see that in her pictures, and
Right.
mostly in the pictures of children, which is something I struggle with on events. And I said, how do you take those pictures? And she said, I connect with my inner child, the inner 4-year-old Gael that's in
Mm.
my body. I let her take over, and I
Right.
realized when I see a kid, I am not the 4-year-old Julian that's inside of me. I'm
Mm.
47-year-old Julian that's a
Yes.
father to
Yeah.
the 4-year-old. So if they make something stupid, I'm a dad judging with dad standards. But she's a child judging with child standards, and she sees the fun, and I see the
Mm.
danger. So this
Right.
is invaluable, because you can't imagine this when you're stuck in your own point of view.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. No, that's
This is the
really
kind of
useful.
thing I learned.
Yeah. This will be the thing I take from this episode, I think.
Okay.
That's really interesting
Yes,
because
that's
I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. And
okay.
so
So
that kind of yeah, the constant battle, I think, to kind of not be um too much of a parent, try and enjoy the fact that they're young and that they're bouncy and free, because that will pass very quickly, and then I'll miss when they were bouncy and free, and
exactly. And you say I was maybe too hard because it seemed to be fun.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly
No.
the same. So this is the kind of thing I take away from an episode. It's
Mm,
you just get out of your own head and get
yeah.
into the head of someone else and understand things that you didn't before.
Yes. Yeah. Well, on the subject of understanding things from before, like you mentioned it right at the top, you were talking about your X100, and
Yeah.
your second lens choice, I think, was the Fuji 35, that
Yes.
1.4. Is that an XT lens, or is that an
I-
X100 equivalent type
It's
thing?
an XT lens, so
Right.
I still have it. It's the original. It's one of the first lenses that was released with the
Mm,
XT line. And as we said, it's imperfect, which is why I love it. So again, now I work with f2 lenses because they're smaller and lighter, and I realized I didn't need the extra weight and the extra stop of light
yep.
when I work. But I still have this one because the new lenses are surgical.
Yes.
which is something I wish Fuji would not go this way,
Right.
because it's the thing that made me fall in love with their cameras. It's
Mm.
it's imperfect gives character. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if it's surgical, anybody can do it. But if it's imperfect and you know the lens, and you can use it to your advantage, you can produce something very unique. If you have to work hard to get imperfection,
Mm.
I don't know if it's still worth it. So it's like people trying to get the analog look on
Yes.
digital cameras. I don't get it. You want
Yeah.
the analog look? Go analog.
Go and shoot. Yeah. Yeah. I had an epiphany about that probably about 2 weeks ago. I was stressing about which lens I should use for which thing. And it all goes back to, and I've told this story before on the podcast, so I'll apologize to listeners for repeating myself, but the guy in a shop got in my head and convinced me that what I was using was wrong.
Yeah.
And what I shouldn't have done was listened, because I ended up losing a lens that I loved. I've now subsequently bought it back again because it's imperfect. It's that 35 mil. And I think it makes magic. And if you want surgical, clinical, precise images, then there are many brands for you. But I think that's what's so interesting about cameras at the moment, is that it's quite hard to buy a bad one at the moment. I think generally they're all pretty good in different ways, but I think they are a little bit more opinionated than maybe people give them credit for. We work with a photographer who shoots Nikon stuff, and he shot some stuff for a new building we're moving into, and it
Mm.
definitely has a look. Like the Z9, the lenses, the combination. Same with Canon. Same with definitely same with Leica and Fuji and things. But it sounds like you feel like Fuji are letting something go, maybe in the pursuit of
Yes,
perfection.
because you buy surgical out of fear. When you work,
Mm,
you want. I bought. I changed the lenses for one reason and one reason only.
mhm.
I prefer the old look, but they are very very slow.
Right.
The slow is it's terrible for what I do, because it's
Mm,
often people moving fast,
yeah.
and so the focus, I miss too many shots,
Right.
important shots. So you always manage to recover things because you can sharpen the images.
Mm,
You can go to black and white and play the artsy type,
yes.
that no, it was on purpose,
Mm,
I like
yeah.
that, I like the picture that way, but in the end, I have to have something faster. So this I do not regret. But I loved the character, and really that's what took me to Fuji in the first place. I used to have a Canon 5D Mark III,
Mm, yeah.
the Trinity of lenses, so the 24 70, 7200, and it was heavy and it was expensive, and
Mm,
I was always traveling with my cameras with a rolling luggage that was very often put inside the cargo of the plane, so I had a lot of trouble with that. So I was tired and I found Fuji, and I could build the same kit in a backpack. And it was when I started making pictures. In the beginning I just had the 35
yeah.
1.4 with XT1, and I had my Canon stuff for work. And sometimes during the job, when it was quieter and I had already done what I had to do, I took the XT1 with the 35 and I started making pictures, and they were very different,
Mm,
very very different. And the other ones were very sharp, and the pictures with the Fuji, they were imperfect, like with the Olympus.
mm, mm,
And I found this, not thinking about it, just looking at the pictures, I felt it.
yeah.
It was magic, a magic moment. I felt that I had found my cameras. Unfortunately, I made a lot of video at the time, so I couldn't switch to Fuji straight
Right.
away. But with the XT2, I sold every Canon gear,
Yeah.
and bought everything Fuji. And it was started for me working only Fuji.
Yeah, nice. And is it about then that you picked up your X100, which sounds like is your kind of the goat for you,
It's
like the
yeah, it's really the goat. So it's not at that time Fuji XT1, XT2. It was 2015, 2017.
right.
The X100V, when I when I was stuck in COVID,
Mm.
I didn't work, and so I started to use my cameras a lot more for personal work. So it was working cameras. I had a lot less work, but I still had some work.
Mm.
And I took the cameras out. So when I'm out in the street, I have the camera on me, around me, or on my back. And so it takes a lot of hits.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe it's not a good idea to do that with my work cameras,
Yeah. Yeah.
which the
You rely
stupidest
on.
thing, because you destroy your camera and then it doesn't work when you need to. So I said I need something just for personal things, and I started looking, and it was either the Ricoh or the Fuji X100V. But I missed the only thing I missed from Canon is the optical viewfinder.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
love not seeing what the image will look like, because you have to think about it more and you
Yeah.
have to pay more attention. It's too easy with electronic viewfinder, because you
Yeah.
see exactly what you're getting.
Hmm.
Sometimes you
Hmm.
make a mistake, you don't think about it, you forget to push one button or the other, and you have an
Mm.
unexpected result, which makes you discover something.
Yeah.
I wanted that, and I got to try a few years later, because I got friends with the manager at Fuji. He lent me the X Pro free for a month
Right.
during
Hmm.
summer, which I used for every job I had this summer, and it was the most fun I had working at the time. And I didn't buy it because the at the moment I was changing cameras, they were releasing the newest sensor, newer everything. It was the XT5, and I wanted performance for work rather than fun. I wish
Yeah.
I could have both,
Of
but at
course.
the time we're speaking, it's 2 years later, and they haven't released an X Pro 4, so it's not happening right now. But the X100V became my everyday camera,
Mm.
which I have all the time on me, and it's working also because it's very small. It's
Yeah.
bigger than a Ricoh GR,
Yeah.
but it's still very, very small compared to anything else.
Mm.
Even an XT5 with the smallest pancake is still bigger than that. So you
Yeah.
can have it in a bag all the time with you, or in your hand all the time. So people look at me all the time smiling, because I always have a camera with me. I'm that person
Yes.
in entourage. I'm that guy that always has
Yeah.
a camera. I'm known for that. When I go with the classes of my kid to theater, to when they go out and I have my camera,
Mm.
I'm kind of expected to make pictures.
Yes. Yeah. It's nice to have an excuse to talk to people who are also that person, because I'm definitely that person in the group. But it's funny, it's a leap of faith, isn't it, when you first start making photographs and you enjoy it. Those first times that you arrive at events, or arrive, like now, because I've worked at the company I'm at now for 4 years, and now anytime we have a summer party or a winter party, people come to find me because they know that I'll have an instant camera with me, either a Polaroid or an Instax.
Mm.
The Christmas party I had the Sofort 2 with me, and then the one before that I took one of my Polaroids. And it's funny, I have a one camera rule, but it does not apply to instant cameras. To instant cameras, I just I sort of feel, because they're all so different to one another, and they all do very different. They are Polaroid or Instax or whatever, the different formats, and it's great. It's great. I like that as well, because you have a job at a party as well. Like if you're stood around and you're not sure what to do, or you don't know people, if you've got a camera, and especially if it's like a silly, like a toy one, like something like
Yeah.
that, right? Like then it starts a conversation, doesn't it?
Any camera works. I've worked when I started working. I've worked in nightclubs,
Mm,
so you can imagine that you have to talk to people, and it's a very complicated environment
yeah,
to discuss with people. And what I realized, when you start talking to someone you don't know, it's not normal situation.
yeah,
You're abnormal for going to talk to someone you don't know, and it's very weird. And they have a startup time, which is, what the fuck do you want with me?
yeah,
In your head, that's exactly what's happening, and you have like 10 seconds when you see clearly that person thinking that, and
mm,
wondering, will you Ask me for money, ask me
Yeah.
for a date, ask
Yep.
me for a drink, ask me what do you want from me. The camera makes you normal, because if you have the camera in the club, you are someone who works here,
Yeah.
and you are allowed to talk to
Yep.
people.
Yep.
And strangely, so when I work, it's always the same. I'm the photographer. I'm allowed to talk to anybody. I'm allowed to be anywhere, because the camera opens a lot of doors. Sometimes it
Hmm.
closes doors, but
Hmm.
most of the time it opens doors. And in the streets, it's the same. You can talk to people because of the camera. So sometimes it's less nice than others.
Mm.
Sometimes people are aggressive, but still they talk to you. And if you can manage, you end up having a real conversation with them. But the
Mm.
camera makes you normal most of the time. Or if it doesn't make you normal, it makes you abnormal. But still, it's a way to start a conversation.
Yes. Yeah. People know that they've got an idea of what to expect. There's a frame of reference.
You're
Yeah.
different. You're different, and you're trying to capture pictures, so they know what you want from the
Yeah.
beginning. So
Yeah.
sometimes they welcome you, sometimes they don't. I
Mhm.
remember working at the nightclubs, a famous footballer who I loved because he scored an amazing goal for France at the Euro 2000.
Mhm.
So if people know soccer, it can only be two players. And I wanted to just go see him and say, "Hi, yeah, yeah, great! You scored the winning goal. Thank you. You're amazing." And
Mhm.
he saw the camera and said, "No, I don't want you to come close to me." So
All right.
this is a conversation anyway. So
Mm.
I got him to talk to me because I had the camera. It was negative, but
Yes.
if I had gone to him without the camera, probably he wouldn't have noticed me.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
start talking.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Did you manage to get a photograph in the end? Did he relent,
No,
or was
no, no,
he?
no.
No.
He was still playing at the time, so
Yeah.
soccer player at a party was not a very good combination, and so I
No.
respected that, and I loved the guy because he scored that goal, and I was on my couch standing and shouting, and I will always love him for that. Yeah, I often ran into former French soccer players from the
Mm.
national team, and I always go to see them. But you see, I saw Lilian Thuram last year in a
Right.
cafe. I didn't have the camera with me,
Yeah.
and I went to tell him thank you for the goals against Croatia,
Mm.
uh, final World Cup, and he
Yeah.
didn't notice me.
Ah.
Uh, I didn't have
Yeah.
the camera. If I had a camera, maybe he would have been more wary, or I don't know,
Yeah.
but maybe that would have struck the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. That's really, it's interesting that you're using the challenge. You know, you're using the environment. Many people, I think, would talk about that as a negative. Like, people notice me with the camera, and oftentimes when you hear people talk about photography, they talk about things being discreet. You know, Ricoh shooters like the GR because it's small and it's very quiet. Um, One of the reasons I justified upgrading my M was because the shutter was quieter. I've never thought about using the obviousness of it, or using the downside as a, just making use of that rather than trying to hide it.
You are allowed to make noise, but maybe it's because the podcast also taught me that I
Mm.
sometimes now record the podcast in public places, and
Mm.
it started with Daniel Milnor.
Yeah.
We recorded on the Champ de Mars, just
Yeah.
behind the Eiffel Tower. And now I go to cafes and I get the recorder out, I get the microphone out, I get the stands for the microphone out, and we're in the middle of the cafe and we're recording, and people look at us and
Yeah.
they wonder what we do. And when you have something so specific,
Yeah.
it's crazy because they wonder and they want to talk and they want to know. And where I record is a cafe near the Maison de la Radio in
Mm.
France, which is
Right.
where the biggest radio stations are. So these are people that are used to seeing microphones and recording gear, and they see
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
The microphone is not the one I'm using now; it's smaller, Shure microphones,
Mhm.
but still, it's very unusual in a cafe to see two people. And
Yeah.
someday, a technician came to me and said, "Why are you in the middle of the cafe? You get all the noise." And I said, "That's what I
Yeah.
want."
Yeah.
Started talking, and he gave me advice on on sound design and things like that, and that's how you start talking.
Yes.
So
Oh, that's
sometimes
so
you're
cool.
weird, but being weird is what starts the conversation.
Yes. No, definitely. I think there's a lot to be said. I have glasses with cameras in,
Yeah.
or with a
So I
camera
was
in.
wondering if you
Yeah.
were filming.
Yeah, no, it's the Snap one, so they don't really have the battery for recording for long periods and stuff. And I have the Ray-Ban Wayfarer ones as well because I think they're really interesting. But the thing about the Snap ones that's great is that you capture things that you wouldn't normally capture. But again, it's a conversation starter. People who notice, sort of, you see them on calls like peering into their webcam and going, "Are you? Is that a camera?" And then they're in, and I can then wax lyrical about why I think it's cool and having pictures, pictures taken
Yeah,
on your face and the way it makes you feel. But it's interesting that you kind of have chosen in many ways to go in that direction of making some of the episodes, putting a bit more of an environment in there and things.
it's
What do you find it adds?
it's not that it adds something. It's for me.
Okay.
I love photography because it gets me out of my house,
Ah,
because you go to see the world. And when I bought the podcast gear,
mm,
it was a very big mixing table and a very big microphone and a boom arm
mhm,
and everything. So it's set up like a photography studio. I still record in my living room.
mhm.
That's behind me. That's the table that's behind me. But I never go out. I make people come to me.
Right.
Once I recorded the episode with Dan, okay, there was a lot of noise. Okay, there was a musician that started playing in the middle of
Yeah.
the episode, and I wanted to kill her. But in the end, it's fun. And you
Yeah.
go to people and you go to see them. I met him in his hotel lobby.
Mm.
I met his wife. I met his coworkers. Who I wouldn't have met anybody if he had came to my
Yes.
place. You
Yeah.
see what? And he would have seen a lot about me. I would
Mm.
have seen nothing about him. So you go out and you discover the world. That's what I love about photography, and I realized I could do that with the podcast also. It's the same purpose.
Yeah.
In the end, I want to meet people. So the camera is a tool for that.
Mm.
The microphone is a tool for that. The journal is a tool for that. Every cafe I go and I journal, they see me with my old school pens
Hmm.
and leather journal. And you see, I
Oh
use,
yeah.
and I love, that's why I tell you, I have this.
Yeah.
I love I wouldn't journal if it wasn't a nice journal that I have a real pleasure to use, you know.
Mm. Mm.
I would not think every day of it, but I want to take it out. I
Yes.
want to write, and people are curious because it's not just a notebook and a shitty big pen,
Yeah.
that you throw away.
Yeah.
It's clear that I enjoy doing it.
Yes.
So you have the camera, you have the microphones, you have the journal, and then people look at you and you're Hemingway, you know?
Yeah, 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 yeah. But I think it's good. It's good for like the creative mind as well. Like I use field notes
Yeah,
journals because they're small. Because I had
I
I
have
have a
one too.
shelf of books. Yeah, I have shelves of books that I never fill, and I started to feel this anxiety around never finishing one
Mm,
somehow. So having these small ones, buying them in a pack of 3, like the Moleskin books as well,
yeah,
you can fill it up. You can put things like your instant pictures and stuff like that in, so that even an Instax wide fits in. You can just fold it up, and like elastic band. It's great when you travel.
yeah.
Really good, and just that, and like you said, like a nice pen. It fits in the book, like great.
And
And
you
then
enjoy it because it's a beautiful stuff and it
mm,
grows old with you. And
yes, yeah,
the pen, you will probably look at it in 20 years and say, okay, I've written my whole life with that.
yeah.
You see, and I'm thinking I'm never, ever, ever letting anyone read my journal.
No.
But so I put pictures in there. I print. I have a small Canon printer that prints
Ah, yes.
adhesive pictures.
Yeah.
So I
Nice.
put them in there, and I document my life and my family's life and everything that I think of. And I will never let anyone. My wife is very frustrated with me because the second she comes near me, I close the
Yeah.
journal,
Yeah.
and I won't let people read it. But I'm thinking someday my kids may find it when I'm not there anymore,
Yes.
and remember a lot of things because of that.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so there's, I like the idea that things last and outlast me.
Mm,
And maybe the podcast, the pictures, maybe it's all part of this. It's maybe in 40 years, I have the one episode of
mm,
one famous photographer, and I'm the only one, or I'm the first one
yeah.
talking to him. And
Yeah.
you get to see inside his mind because of me.
Yes.
Maybe, maybe not,
Yeah.
probably not, but maybe one thing remains of me, and that's a podcast episode or a picture or something like
Yeah.
that.
Oh no, that's wonderful. I think that's a wonderful way to kind of like to look at creating and like to look at your archive of the things that you make, because we all
Yeah.
produce so much stuff. But no, it's great, and it's probably a lovely note to end on. Actually, thank you so much for doing this, Julian. I
Thank
really,
you for
really
inviting
appreciate it.
me.
I feel very lucky that you did that podcast with Dan, and I heard you speak, and I just thought you seemed like a really interesting photographer, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
I really appreciate you inviting me. It was amazing coming. I'm always worried because of my English, because I haven't spoken in a very, very long time during COVID. I used to speak, I think, pretty good English.
Mm,
And now I feel it's harder. Some words I don't remember. But as everything in life, you say let's go. At the worst it's not working, nobody is
yeah.
going to if it doesn't work, people won't notice. So it's
Yes.
okay, you just go, and if it works, it's amazing. That's
Yeah, no,
the
it
positive.
definitely works. It definitely works. And a member of my team is French and was very impressed that I was talking to a French photographer. I thought that was quite cool. She was like, you're into when you reposted that thing on Instagram, she was like, you're international. So yeah, no, it's great. It's been absolutely fantastic. But yeah, and I will definitely stay in touch, Julian. I'll let you know if
Thank
I'm
you.
ever in Paris.
If you come, please call me. If I come near you, I will call you
Yeah.
also. the
Yeah, the
the
Highlands of
best
Scotland
thing
wait.
about meeting people with a podcast is the podcast is fun recording, but it's keeping in touch and going
Yeah.
make pictures together. That's the best amazing part. The most amazing part of it is you make friends.
Yeah. No,
That's the point.
definitely. Yes. Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, man.
Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful rest of the day.
You too. Bye.
Take care. Bye. So there we are. A huge thanks to Julien for taking the time to talk there. A really, really good conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. After we stopped recording, because he's a radio pro, he stayed on for a bit, and I mentioned to him that I was planning on doing, 10 of these, just to see what it was like. And he made me promise that I would make at least 20, and that he would check. So bad luck, everyone. You're stuck with me for at least another 15 episodes. If you enjoyed that, you can sign up to the newsletter and listen to more episodes every week. And until next time, thanks for listening.